Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man da'a bi da'watihi wastanna bi sunnatihi ila yaumiddin, amma ba'd. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. My beloved students, alhamdulillah, today we are able to meet again, even though in this virtual platform. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we are able to be physically engaged one day, and we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to free us and lift this pandemic COVID-19 from us. Amin ya Rabbal Alameen. So inshallah, the topic that we are addressing today is a very important topic: good governance. When we look at the topic itself, the idea of good governance is something related to our relationship with human beings, right? We have, in a theological perspective, hablun min Allah, represented in our relationship as a servant to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or Abdullah. And we have another part of Al-Hablu itself, which is Hablun Minan Nas, our relationship with human beings, okay, represented in our role and our status as Khalifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how to build a good relationship with human beings. All right. When we look into Arabic translations of good governance, we find that the words used is Al-Hawkamah Ar-Rashidah. Okay, Department of Fiqh used to organize the conference on this Al-Hawkamah Ar-Rashidah, good governance, in 2 years back. So in discussing the good governance, I will divide it into 2 parts, and today's lecture will cover the part 1, okay, comprised of introduction, and then the meanings of good governance, principles of good governance, and also contextualizing the principles of good governance nowadays. So this will be the coverage of our today's lecture. As an introduction, we may find that the terms governance and good governance are being extensively used in the media's limelight, in the government policies and slogans, used in the journals, literatures, and also we may find that when we open conference alert, there will be themes of the conference bear the terms governance and good governance. So why this concept governance and good governance are in the limelight of our discussion, or one of the important topics discussed by many people nowadays. Okay, so we may find that it is a response to the practices of good governance. It is a response to dishonesties, corruptions, prevailing corruptions. So people are talking about good governance in response to these kind of issues. And we may find that these issues also emerge in the mainstream discourse as the demands and targets of the Sustainable Development Goals, okay, set up by the United Nations, commonly known as Agenda 2030. So the Sustainable Development Goals is also deliberated by our rector, okay, and it becomes our mantra, okay, in the university. We will talk about the agenda of the Sustainable Development Goals later on. Okay, we have these 17 goals, and to achieve these 17 goals, it requires good practice and good governance. When we look at the mainstream medias, okay, we may find this kind of coverage. 12 principles of good democracy, the good governance. So it was there, okay, in the media's limelight, and it is still in currency. All right. Before we move further on the principles and also the meaning of good governance, let us ponder on what have been mentioned by Jos Ugas, the chairman of Transparency International. So he is the responsible person, okay, who headed the measurement on how to measure the good governance, okay, in the United Nations in particular. So he mentioned about in too many countries, people are deprived of their most basic needs and go to bed hungry every night because of corruption, while the powerful and corrupt enjoy lavish lifestyle with impunity. Okay, so he highlight the issue related to dishonesties, corruption, okay, which is prevailing nowadays, and because of that corruption, people are suffering. Okay, whereas the powerful, those who have power, they are able to enjoy lavish lifestyle without any restriction. They are immune from any punishment. Okay, so this is the corruption, and how to respond to this idea of corruption is by introducing good governance. Okay, and we may also look at this image, okay, related to problems faced by society due to bad governance. For example, red tape, okay, something related to unnecessary rules and delay results due to bureaucracy, corruption, ineffectiveness, inefficiency, okay, secrecy, meaning that it is people are hiding something from others, from societies, from masses, okay, secrecy, whereas in good governance, we are emphasizing on the idea of transparency, right? All the information is easily accessible by people. Okay, maladministration, okay, short-sightedness. Okay, this is problems faced by society due to bad governance, short-sightedness. Suppose the leader to have far-sightedness, meaning that considering all factors, all variables in taking decisions. Short-sightedness will give negative impacts on the development of the countries. Okay, so the leaders should have this kind of far-sightedness in their decision making. Okay, considering what is the long term, okay, impact on society if certain decision is taken. So this is important things needs to be highlighted. And then corruption's also something related to kleptocracy, okay, misuse of power among corrupt leaders to exploit the natural resources in order to extend their personal wealth and power. So this is the phenomenon of corruption, okay, pervasive corruption, and also something related to bribery, okay, under table money, right? So these are something related to corruptions, okay. There are coverage in New Straits Times mentioning that 2018 Corruption Perception Index, okay, that clearly shows there is no Muslim country ranked in the top 20, okay, of being least corrupt of the 180 countries surveyed. So this is something regrettable because they're supposed to lead the way, okay, but others lead the way, okay, others lead the way in representing this the idea of good governance, okay. Suppose that we lead the way because we have the Quranic text, we have the prophetic guidance on how to practice this good governance, but unfortunately we are not leading the way, we are not spearheading the text, we are not spearheading the context of good governance, okay. Others are leading, okay, like Denmark, okay, New Zealand, Finland, Singapore, Switzerland. They are leading the way, and they are not Muslim majority countries. They are not Muslim countries, but they are leading in terms of good governance, in terms of less corrupt countries, right? And having this kind of fact, it is something need to be done, okay? Something regrettable, okay? Something which we consider as shameful, having this kind of data. And this data is in 2018 Corruption Perception Index, right? It is there in the New Straits Times coverage. And this is also dismal record here, bottom 10 ranked countries, okay, in terms of corruption, Okay, we have this Muslim majority countries are there in this bottom 10 rank nations in terms of corrupt list. All right, we have Sudan here, we have Libya, we have Iraq, we have Syria, right? This is in according to CPI, okay, published in 3rd December 2013. And this is, we consider it's a dismal record. And this omnipresent corruption has corroded Muslim community and cultures across the world. Okay, so having this corruption represented in ingesting bribery, in terms of money laundering, in terms of selling fraudulent goods, in terms of gaining advantage through nepotism, breaching trust, stealing public property, and we may find these behaviors common among government, officers, businesses, political parties, clergy, and even among the ordinary folks living in the Muslim countries. Okay, it seems that true Islam is noticeable not in the Muslim countries, but the true Islam is being practiced in Sweden, Denmark, New Zealand. Okay, so this is a very sad fact, right? This is something related to 17 goals of SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals, issued by or promoted by United Nations. And looking at these 17 goals, okay, we may conclude that the goals cannot be achieved except by practicing good governance. No poverty, for example, goal number 1, cannot be achieved except by having good governance. Okay, there is interesting sayings by Sheikh Mitwal al-Sha'rawi. For example, he mentioned that if there is a poor people in the country, okay, it means that there is rich people that has not done his job or not doing his proper responsibility. Okay, this is the words from one of the popular, or one of the influential figure in Egypt, Sheikh Mitwal al-Sha'rawi. Okay, because meaning that the rich people, okay, they are not paying zakah. If they are paying zakah, there will be no poverty, no sufferings. Okay, like what we have read in the history of Omar ibn Abdul Aziz, for example, where during his time there is nobody in the territories of his khilafah needs the zakah. Okay, and the zakah needs to be given to people of other territories. Okay, meaning that the rich, they are doing their job in helping or assisting the poor. So no poverty. In order to achieve this goal number 1 requires good governance, requires all principles enshrined in good governance itself. Okay? Without good governance, no poverty will not be achieved. And also zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation. Okay, and all these 17 goals requires good governance. Okay, good governance. So when we look at the 17 goals, when we look at the banner, okay, in front of UIA grand stairs, for example, about SDGs, for example, so we need to remember this is the 17 goals, okay, formulated by United Nations, okay, that in 2030, if I'm not mistaken, okay, all countries in the world, okay, should achieve this goal. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, to achieve the 17 goals will not taken place without good governance. That's why our discussion on good governance nowadays is of paramount importance. Now we look at what this good governance is all about. So based on the report of the Commission on Global Governance, okay, our global neighborhood, so the term governance refers to the sum of the many ways individuals and institutions, public and private, manage their common affairs. It is a continuing process through which conflicting or diverse interests may be accommodated and cooperative action may be taken. It includes formal institutions and regimes empowered to enforce compliance, as well as informal arrangements that people and institutions either have agreed to or perceive to be in their interest. So this is the governance is all about. It's something related to mechanism on how to manage individuals, how to manage institutions, how to manage common affairs, okay, and how to manage diverse interests. So these are the pillars of the governance itself, or the essence of governance itself. Whereas when we talk about good governance, is a kind of normative conception of the values according to which the acts of governance is realized and the method by which groups of social actors interact in a certain social context. So it is something related to SOPs, it is something related to certain standards, okay? Certain rules and regulations need to be adhered to and needs to be followed by those who are involved, okay? The rulers and the ruled, and the method by which groups of social actors interact in a certain social context. So this is what this good governance is all about. So to elaborate further, when we mention about good governance, it's something related to the ability to perform efficiently, okay, effectively and responsibly, okay, guided by principles that are feasible and desirable at all levels of the society, not just at the political one. So this is what this good governance is all about. Our ability to perform efficiently, right? effectively and responsively. There is no delay in our action. There is no waste in our action. There is no difficulties, okay, burdening others in our action. Okay. So this is good governance is all about, guided by principles, okay, that are feasible and desirable. So when Islamic point of view is concerned, so we have guided by revelation, okay, we have guided by the prophetic teachings, okay, which is becoming our guiding principles in our action, right? That are feasible and desirable at all levels of the society, not just at the political one, but all parties, okay, individuals, organizations, they are perform, they are act upon something, they are take action efficiently, effectively, and responsively, okay, guided by principles. And what are the principles of good governance? So based on the deliberation by the experts or those who are dealing with good governance, they come up with certain principles of good governance. Good governance has these principles of accountable, transparent, responsive, consensus-oriented, participatory, inclusive, following rule of law, efficient. So these are the main principles of good governance. And it is not only agreed upon by the West, it is also in conformity with Islamic teaching. Even Islamic teachings itself address these principles long time ago. Okay, the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam emphasize on these principles of good governance, and Sirah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam representing all this kind of good governance. It is not the West who come up with the principles of good governance, but we are earlier than them in not only talking, but we are walking our talks, okay, implementing good governance in the history. Okay, I give you examples regarding the rule of law. For example, in Islam, Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned that لو كانت فاطمة بنت محمد سرقت لقطعت يدها. Okay. If the daughter of the Prophet, Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet, commits stealing, for example, I, okay, will chop her hand, okay, without any discrimination, okay, without any favoritism, okay. So without any discrimination, I myself will chop her hand. So this is the rule of law, okay, introduced by Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Consensus oriented, we in our Islamic tradition we have the idea of shura, for example, okay, the shura of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with his companions during the Battle of Khandaq, for example. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam have conducted a meeting with his companions to get their consensus on how to deal, okay, how to what is the best way to encounter the Kuffar Quraysh during that time. So it is agreed upon that they build a huge khandak, okay, agreed upon the opinions of Salman al-Farisi, okay, who share his experience regarding the Persian practice, okay. So it is accepted by the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and the companions, and the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam himself translates, okay, in the practical way the idea of shura, consensus oriented, and other areas also transparent, accountable, inclusive, participatory. There are there in our Islamic tradition, and the teachings of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam himself is embodiment of these principles of good governance. We will talk about Islam and good governance later on in our part 2, right? Next, we look at the principles of good governance, okay, that we mentioned earlier, and how to contextualize it in our current situation, right? First, we look at what is transparency is all about and how to translate the idea of transparency in our times. First, when we talk about transparency, it's something related to the decision-making process, which ensures that information is freely available and accessible to those involved or affected by the decisions taken. Transparency, therefore, means free access to information, meaning that if you are layman or you are policymakers, if you are laymen, you are able to access the information, right? Nowadays, during this COVID-19, for example, we are transparent, okay? Alhamdulillah, our Malaysian government is transparent in giving the accurate data about the number of those who are affected by COVID-19, new cases, okay, the death cases, okay, and it is easily accessible, okay, through medias, okay, through websites, and they are updated daily, right? So this is the idea of transparency. It's all about information is freely, okay, available and accessible to those involved or affected by the decisions taken. And the government must have complete transparency with all its decision makings, as well as with its implementations of laws and policies that should be aligned to the rules and regulations of good governance. Additionally, all information must be easily accessible and understandable by the media, as well as by the ordinary citizens. So transparency itself, it requires that information is easily digested, understood by many levels of the societies. So this is one of the principles of good governance. If it is something difficult to understand, something difficult to grasp, so it is not considered as transparent, right? By doing this, disseminating important information about the activities and real status of the government would be easily monitored and understood by the entire citizenry. So those who are the expert in good governance, they come up with strategies, especially on how to contextualize transparency in our current situation. For example, they come up with the idea of hire and engage transparent employees, encourage strict communication, okay, insist on proactive use of social media by leaders, consider eliminating layers of titles and opening up transparency in finance, create an online forum for employees in asking questions of the leadership. So these are the strategies on how to contextualize, how to unearth this the idea of transparency. Next principle of good governance is accountability, right? So in Islam we have the idea of mas'uliyah, okay, mas'uliyah, accountability or responsibility, okay. Everyone is responsible for his action, okay. All of the participants in the political and economic processes been accountable for their decisions to each other, meaning that the leaders are responsible, okay. The societies are responsible, the individuals are responsible towards their action, okay. It reminds us to the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, kullukum ra'in, okay, wa kullukum mas'ulun an ra'iyatih. And then the Prophet described in details, okay, that the husband is responsible to his family, okay, and then he ended the hadith with fa'atikul ladzi haqqin haqqahu. You need to give the right of those who deserve the right, right? And denotes responsibility of the government towards govern, and also the mechanism through which people can exercise their influence over the government. So be accountable must be to-do list, okay, by all relevant parties. Normally, accountability is applied on political and civil public officers who are responsible before the citizens. They exercise their powers and functions in the name and interest of the peoples. This is normal, even though every party is responsible. But when we talk about leaders, they are fully responsible towards their actions, okay? And they are carrying huge responsibilities, okay? That's why they needs to be the most accountable in the level of the societies itself. In the case of political accountability, people hold their representative accountable through the election. So when we talk about accountability, we need to accountable, okay? We need to be accountable. We need to be responsible, okay? And whatever amanah given to us, we need to fulfill the amanah. We should not betray the amanah, okay? It is our responsibility. And as a Muslim, we are not accountable, okay, to our superior or to our boss, okay? We are in the highest level, we are accountable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our action, okay? And we will be asked by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the day after whether we are doing our job appropriately or not, okay? In the case of political, there are people who, okay, keep on finding people, okay, to be blamed. He avoid himself from being responsible to any actions, okay. For example, in this cartoon, Miss Wilcox sent in someone to blame. We are not doing that. We are not pointing fingers, okay, to others. We first and foremost, we blame ourselves we are fully accountable. We are blaming ourselves for not being responsible if anything bad happened, okay, before we pointing fingers to others. We are not like in Malay song, for example, keep on blaming others. Okay, the song of Bangau, Bangau, right? Kenapa engkau kurus? Kenapa aku tak kurus? Okay. Hujan tak turun. And then hujan kenapa tidak turun? And then he keep the rain keep on pointing the fault against the frog, because frog is not playing her job, for example. So this is the idea of membangau is not there in as the principle of good governance. Good governance highlighting or addressing the idea of accountability, not pointing fingers, not finding others to be blamed. So this is the idea related to accountability. Not to say this is his fault, not to say this is her fault, their fault, not me. This is not the attitude of accountable person. Move on to the next principle of good governance, rule of law. Good governance implies the rule of law maintained through the impartiality and effectiveness of the legal system. So it is something related to observe the justice, observe the impartiality of the legal system. Okay. Something related to independent judiciary, something related to impartial and incorruptible law enforcement agencies. So this is the rule of law is all about. The rule of law involves a variety of conditions being strongly connected to good administration of justice, good legal framework, verified dispute mechanism, equal access to justice, and the independence of judiciary workers. So this is rule of law is all about. Okay, I mentioned before, this is there in our Islamic tradition, and it is not only there in the text of the Quran, but it is the Prophet, the one who translate the idea of rule of law during his lifetime, and also Khulafa al-Rashidun, Omar, for example, he is the one of the example of the one who exemplified the idea of rule of law, right? When he punished the sons of the governor of Egypt. Okay, the governor of Egypt during the times of Omar is Amr ibn al-As. Okay, without looking at the status of the governor, okay, Omar did take action against the son of Amr ibn al-As due to, okay, the rude action by the son of Amr ibn al-As, okay, the governor of Egypt. So Omar really observed the rule of law, okay, in that sense. He punished, okay, by caning the son of Amr ibn al-As due to some misconduct done by the son of Amr ibn al-As, okay, towards the Egyptian guy. Another principle of good governance is participatory. Okay, so it equals to the idea of shura in Islam, meaning that members of society, they are having important role in the process of decision making. In decision making, it is not one-man show. It involves others. For example, when we talk about having lecture, for example, having a lecture session, whether to have synchronous or asynchronous session, for example, it requires a kind of mutual agreement between the student and the lecturer. When the university decided on having virtual or face-to-face class session, for example, it requires participation. That's why in our university we have conducted survey to get the feedback from students, okay, before any decision is taken due to this COVID pandemic. So this is part of the good governance, okay, exemplified by our university. Everybody is involved, okay, in decision-making process. It is not only top management decision, and it should be adhered to and followed by, okay, whether you like it or not, no, but it involves the decision is taking into consideration also the reality of the students and the reality of the pandemic, and taking into consideration the latest development of the pandemic itself. So this is participatory is all about. And then regarding this participatory and how to contextualize it, we may find, okay, many proposal, okay, given by the experts in leadership, governance. For example, Wilcox proposed 5 stages of people's participation. Okay, this is how to contextualize the idea of participation, the idea of shura itself. It requires inform. Okay, this is the first layer of contextualizing the participatory process, inform, and of course it is one-way communication. And then at this stage, the governing agency tells people about their decision before or during implementation of development programs. And then the next layer is consultation. Okay, it is two-way communication, where the governing agency comes to the people with their proposal and consults over the matter in order to make the decision of implementation. So this is engagement with people. Okay, and then the next stage of participatory is involved. Okay, deciding together. At this stage, the governing agency involve people in decision making, engage people with the budget distribution, and implements the whole program together. So we may find this kind of participatory, for example, in handling the pandemic of COVID-19. Okay, there is what we call it as inform level, there is consultation level, there is involvement level, there is a collaborating level between many parties, PDRM, RELA, and other frontliners, people, okay? And also empowerment is also one important part of participatory itself. Okay, supporting independent community interests. Okay, governing agency creates the scope for developing the capacity of people to come forward with their decisions and resources to implement development programs jointly. In reality, people control the governance, and the agency plays the role of facilitator for development implementation at this stage. So Dr. Nur Hisham Abdullah also mentioned about the idea of having this this level, empowerment, people to be given power to take care of themselves and to educate themselves and uh, to keep themselves safe, for example. So this is the idea related to empowerment. Then consensus-oriented society. Okay. For any group or organization to function effectively, it must be able to make decisions well. Okay. This is one of the important principles of good governance, to have a kind of consensus. Without consensus, uh, good governance will not be able to materialize. If there is a position from certain parties on certain decisions, for example, so there will be something wrong with the decision. Okay, consensus-oriented society. For any group or organization to function effectively, it must be able to make decisions well. So in order to have this consensus-oriented decision, we need we need to determine subject matter. We need to open the discussion, underlying worries, developing proposal, determine cause, propose decision, and closing. This is how we contextualize the idea of consensus-oriented society. And another important principles of good governance is effectiveness and efficiency. What we meant by effectiveness here is doing the right things. Okay, there are people who are not doing the right thing. It is not a good governance. Okay, it will lead to chaos. It will lead to bad impact on the individuals, on the society, because of not doing effectiveness. Okay, because not translating the idea of effectiveness. Effectiveness means you do something, you do the right thing. Okay, you do the right thing. Okay, efficiency is doing the thing right. Okay, according to regulations, according to the procedures, according to the standards, according to the laws. Okay, so effectiveness and efficiency is a important ingredient, okay, to translate the idea of good governance. So good governance means that processes and institutions produce results that meet the needs of society while making the best use of resources at their disposal. The concept of efficiency in the context of good governance also covers the sustainable use of natural resources and the protection of the environment. Decision makers should have a broad and long-term vision on how to better the process of governance to ensure continued economic and social development. Process must be in place to ensure the most productive use of resources. Okay. Efficient, doing the thing right, okay, according to the rules, according to regulations, according to procedures. Okay, so it will save budget. It will not bring waste, okay, to the time, to the people. This is efficient. Okay, this is efficient. For example, during this pandemic, the university decided to have this ERTL, for example. So the university in this context, she's doing the right thing. The university is doing the right thing because we are not able to have the face-to-face session, physical session, okay, physical engagement, okay, in the classroom because of the pandemic. So alternatively, the university come up with the idea of virtual learning, for example. So it's doing the right thing. Okay, there is a maslahah for doing so. So it avoid the widespread of the disease, for example. And doing the thing according to the procedure, okay, without sacrificing the quality of teaching and learning process itself, okay, and to ensure that the outcome of the teaching and learning process is achieved, okay, even though using other platforms, right? And handling, sending back student and using a very tight procedures, okay, sanitizing the buses, sanitizing the students, okay, and having their temperature checkup, for example. So this is reflecting of the idea of effectiveness and efficiency done by the university. So we are translating to some extent the idea of good governance. Next, principles of good governance is equity and inclusiveness. Okay, so we may look at these images to have a better understanding of what is equality is all about and what is equity is all about. So equality, for example, these chairs, they are equal in size, okay, but equality is not enough, okay, because there are other people who have no chance, okay, to get access to witness the event, for example, like this little girl. Because of the equality, okay, she have denied access to witness the football games, for example. Whereas equity, okay, we give people their due rights. For example, this little girl able to watch the games because she was given this kind of equity, okay, this stairs, so that she able to witness the game. So now when we talk about governance, we are in fact transforming ourselves from equality to equity. This is very important. It is not only equal, it is not equality anymore that we are talking about, but we are talking about equity, to give people their due rights and their due opportunities. And it is also inclusiveness, right? Equity and inclusiveness. So the right of all individuals to opportunities to improve or maintain their well-being in an equitable and inclusive manner. Okay, this is the idea related to good governance. Okay, every individuals being treated in an inclusive way. For this, even though he is OKU, for example, he has the opportunity to improve himself like normal people. Okay, have access to education. Okay, has been given a mechanism to develop himself, even though he is handicapped and or OKU status. But this good governance, they are taking in consideration all these kind uh, of these factors, okay, to improve or maintain their well-being in an equitable and inclusive manner. It requires that all decisions of an organization be made within framework that is outward-looking and future-oriented. And you may look at this image as well to have further understanding on the differences between equality versus equity. And when we talk about good governance, we are moving towards equity and inclusiveness. We have problems with equality. Equality, there are shortcomings in equality because there are people who is deprived, who is denied their opportunity, who is not able to improve himself. by clinging on the idea of equality. We are moving towards equity and inclusiveness. I think this is will end my first part of the my lecture on good governance. We are moving in our next session on part 2, Islam and the idea of good governance, how Islam look at good governance, what are the principles, okay, what are Islamic principles related to good governance, what are the examples of good governance in the text and the context, okay, of Islam. So these topics will be covered in our part 2. That's all for today. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. If you have any questions related to this part 1, okay, you may text me in WhatsApp, or you may use iTa'lim channel, okay, to channel your views or to seek more clarifications. Thank you very much.